Good morning, everyone. This is Michele Hughes from Ageless and Timeless. I'm sitting here in my beautiful home in Northern California today, and we finally had the rain stop, so we're looking at spring. And I'm interviewing someone that I've been wanting to meet in person, but he's over there and across the pond in London, or close to London, south of London. We'll talk about that in a moment. His name is Phil Micans. Some people say Micans, right, Phil?
I don't mind. I got one of those names that goes either way.
Right,
It's fine by me.
So we'll say Micans for your family, because I understand that's what your family
That
uses.
is true. That is true.
And Micans for all of us in the United States probably would be easier said that way. It's interesting. Phil lives south of London, everybody, and he lives in an area that I went to school at Oxford a little bit in my graduate studies, and I thought I knew that area, and I've traveled all over the Great Britain, but I've never heard of this area he lives in called New Forest. And it's south of London, and apparently it's the closest town is Ringwood, is what he told me. But the William the First had in 1079 had dedicated land as open space land, and so Lucky Phil lived with all of this open space land where there are horses and cattle and whatever. It's nature. Nature is surrounding him. I think this is very fitting that a man that we're going to talk about, and he'll tell us more about himself and what he's doing, for something that's a groundbreaking in really coming from nature, from the miracle of our bodies, is living in an area that just fits him. So was that an accident, Phil, or did you actually go looking for a place to live that suits who you are as a human?
Yeah, I've thank you for that introduction, Michele. It's very kind of you. Basically, I've realised that I'm a country boy at heart. I was born in a country area, and although I have lived in a few cities in my life, I've always hankered to live in the country. And I've also come to a realization that relaxation is very important. When I was a very driven businessman many years ago, I thought relaxation was almost a waste of time. What am I sitting here doing nothing or whatever? And as I get older, I realized that if you want a true comprehensive anti-aging program, that relaxation, it could be meditation, it could be fishing, it could be painting, it could be whatever floats your boat, is an important part of it. And I think it's necessary sometimes to clear our minds. Very often in my life, whenever I've had a problem to resolve, I find that if I go away from that problem and empty my head of it, that when I come back to it, I see the solution very quickly. So I think it helps, for me, being in the country, helps to take some of the noise out of the brain, if that's a way of putting it. So I do enjoy living down here. And by the way, me, I'm a bit of a joker, a bit of a raconteur. And you're absolutely right. The New Forest was established by William the First in 1079. And I often get Americans ask me, why do they still call it the New Forest? And my answer is, well, it's only 1,000 years old. So,
Right. Well,
there you go.
You're very lucky to live that close to London, which is, everyone's favorite city, or a lot of people's favorite city. And of course, one of our greatest allies as Americans. But to live so close and yet have all this beautiful nature around you.
I can always go into London. I can always get on the train and be in central London within 2 hours, and go to the theatre, or go and have a nice meal in a fancy restaurant, or whatever it is you want to do, and still go back and have a nice quiet time and watch wild ponies walking around. So it's quite pleasant.
And I love the artwork behind you. It says, "We can do it." So I hope everybody can see that on the podcast. That probably is the best analogy or description of Phil, of what he has done in life. So
that's a famous American war poster from the Second World War. She was called Rosie the Rivet.
Rosie
the Rivet, and of course it was the idea of getting ladies into the workplace then, right? Because the
Right.
men had gone to war and there was factory jobs that needed doing. But I do love that slogan. And what you can't see in my study are two other war posters. I have one up here, which is an old British one, which says, "Your courage, your cheerfulness, your resolution will bring us victory." And
Oh,
over there is a slight bit of a joke, bit of a tongue-in-cheek one. It's not a war one, I admit, and it's a picture of Christ, and it says at the top, "Jesus is coming," and underneath it says, "So look busy." And
that's great.
there
It's very
you
interesting.
go.
I think that says a lot about you, Phil. And so let's talk about you. I just want to give a brief introduction and say that Phil is a raconteur. He's a Renaissance man, but the focus that he's had for his since 1980s in both his education and his work, his vocation, has been in anti-aging, and of course that means he sings the song that we sing at Ageless and Timeless, which is how do we as human beings find the answers to solve not so much that we're going to live forever, but that we're going to live better and longer and better. We don't want to live longer if we can't live a quality life. So who wants to be sick? So who wants to live in any form that's not our fullest potential? So that really is the genesis of this podcast, and that is what we have over 3 years now have tried to accomplish with the guests that we've had. So, Phil, tell us a little bit about how you got to be where you are today.
Okay. Well, you're absolutely right in what you've said, Michelle. I never use the word immortality, basically because if you look it up in the dictionary, it says it's a very, 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 and you have to turn over about 19 pages, a very, 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 very long time. And you're absolutely also right in saying that what is the point of a long life without decent health? And that is the problem we face today when we talk to the non-believers, as it were, in saying that human lifespans should be a lot longer than they are. Most people turn it down because they say, "Oh, I don't want to have 60, 80 years in a care home." Well, that's not the point. Nobody wants that. But how about being 140 years old but performing like a decent 40-year-old? How
Right,
about that? Would that,
right,
I always say, everyone, I'm a libertarian at heart. I believe people can have the freedom to choose whatever they want to do. If
right,
it doesn't impact on anybody else's life or liberty, what's the problem? So,
right,
but in that regard, you know, uh, uh, some people might think anti-aging is the way your skin is, the way your hair is, the way whatever. That's fine if that's what you think. But to me, there are three fundamental things that we want from anti-aging, and that is we want to remain lucid, we want to remain agile, and above all, we want to remain independent. And I think if we've got those three things in our life, we have a life.
mm-hmm.
Okay,
Really,
we can talk, we can move, we can do. None of us want to be helped to go to the toilet or have a bath or whatever the situation is. So
right,
those to me are the fundamentals that we should achieve, that we can achieve.
right,
So when I was a young man, when I was a teenager, um, I always thought I was aging faster than my friends. There were aspects of me that when I looked at my friends, I thought, why do I look older than them? And I
mm-hmm.
suppose that was something that stuck in my mind. So that was something that got me onto this course. The other thing was having to visit my uncle, who was at the time in his 80s, in a geriatric ward in the local hospital. Now, he wasn't a geriatric in the sense that people think of what a geriatric is, and what I'd like to explain the real meaning of that word in just 1 second. But he had in other words, he had all his marbles. He was there. You could talk to him, have a conversation. But because of his age, they put him into the quote unquote geriatric ward. And I sat next to him for, played chess with him, whatever the situation was, had long chats with him while he was stuck there for a while. And I looked around at the other guys who were in that ward, and it was a bit horrifying. And I say that with children, when I speak to teachers in schools, I said, I wish there were two things that they would do before children leave school. One is they should go and visit a prison, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, you don't want to end up here, do you? Go and show them what it's like. And the
Mm-hmm.
other one is go and take them to a geriatric ward
Mm-hmm.
and say, again, how are you going to help us stop this?
Mm-hmm.
So, so that was it. By the way, the correct meaning of the word geriatric, if you ask a gerontician, is somebody over the age of 65.
Oh,
All it
please.
means. That's all it means. It doesn't mean incapacitated in any way. And rather frighteningly, pre-geriatric is anyone over 45. It's
Who
just a
got
term.
the definition, Phil?
Yeah, that's all it means. So
I mean,
people
really,
get hung up.
what was that today? That would be completely shocking because 65 is the new 35, right? As
Yeah,
we like.
absolutely. Absolutely. I
Well,
mean, in my father's day, I think anyone over the age of 50 was expected to buy a pipe, some slippers, and a Labrador because
right,
their life had ended.
right.
Now, people at the age of 50 are climbing up Mount Everest and, I don't know, canoeing up the Orinoco or whatever it is, which is great. And it's how it should be. Life is for living.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Water and Wellness. Water and Wellness is one of the best companies to find purified water. They have a countertop system that I use and I travel with it all the time. So I would highly recommend you look at that. If you use the Ageless code, you'll get a 10% discount. waterandwellness.com/pages/Ageless and Timeless. That's how you can order to get the discount. So visit waterandwellness.com or call 877-296-6880 to learn how to take control of your drinking water and learn about all those natural additives to optimize your health and
You
longevity.
probably have read that the life expectancy in the U.S. has gone down. So we have a new paradigm that we're dealing with. And why is it that the U.S. is so far down in the healthcare systems for like a third world country for a major superpower that
Yeah.
and that's a whole other subject. We'll talk about that
Yeah.
at another time. But for our viewers, what I would like you to do is to explain to me, to us, all of us, what it is that you are doing today that is so earth-shattering, that is such an aha moment in life, in our life trajectory for health and wellness. And I'm going to throw out the term to everyone that maybe not anyone here has heard about yet, except a few maybe, but it's called peptide bioregulators. So the first thing that comes to mind is that because I've been taking some peptides through the anti-aging doctors here, but they're not peptide bioregulators, so they're different. So that's BPC 157 and Samarelin and Ipamorelin, and so these are long terms, but they're basically considered they're peptides and they're breakthroughs in healing and wellness. But what is the difference? Distinguish for us between a peptide bioregulator, which is what you're focused on, and just a regular peptide that's also new and in most cases unheard of in the medical world today for treatments.
Certainly, Michelle. I mean, very quick biochemistry lesson. You have amino acids, okay, the building blocks of life, if you will. In fact, there are 7 what they call essential amino acids. What does the word essential mean in this context? It means if you don't get it, you die. So it's pretty essential. So you have amino acids, and as amino acids can join with one another, and of course the mathematician can work out how many different positions that those amino acids could have to make a different peptide. As soon as 2 amino acids can join, it becomes a peptide, technically a dipeptide, okay? But you can keep adding different amino acids onto this chain, okay? And as that chain gets longer of amino acids, we can even start to change the name. We can go from peptides to proteins and even to hormones. So although there's a slight other play on that, but just to give an example, human growth hormone, which I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with, is a very long chain of amino acids. It's 191 amino acids. What does that mean? Well, it means it's pretty unstable, and it means that you can't swallow it. You have to inject it, okay? So coming back down to peptides, what are peptide bioregulators? Well, they are very short chains of amino acids. This is number one. So in other words, they're 2, 3, or 4 amino acids. That makes them particularly small. There are a lot of, just trying to think, if off the top of my head, semarelin, if I remember correctly, is 39 amino acids. Okay, it's in, I might be slightly out on that, but it's around that number. So you get an idea. I'm talking about no more than 4 amino acids. However, it is also true to say that not every short chain of amino acids is a bioregulator. Okay, and I'll get into explaining what that word means a little bit later on. But what we are looking at here is principally this research we're going to talk about today was a Soviet military secret. So back in the 1980s, the Soviets started work on this, okay? And they discovered something, again, which we'll get into. And initially, it was reserved for their elite troops, their cosmonauts, and their some of their Olympic teams. Now, today, in what is modern Russia today, it is on the open market. And it's not just Russia, it is also the Russian-speaking countries, yes, the Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and places like that. So this is the amazing thing about this is millions of people have tried them over 40 years. They have amazing research that's in vitro, in other words, in a laboratory, in animal experiments, and the most amazing human experiments as well. And what they found is these bioregulators are gene switches, okay? And they're in food. So to me, it explains in a heartbeat the epigenetics of food, right? Because there are elements in food that are gene switches. And this is principally a Russian discovery. In fact, if I just go over here, I helped write this book here, which is called Peptides in the Epigenetic Control of Aging. Okay. And this is a scientific book. This is the deep dive into
but you also wrote, excuse me, I've interrupted you also wrote another book for the lay persons, right? That's the same.
Right.
Yes.
That's
and what was that?
That's
Okay.
this one. And this one, it was written with a doctor friend of mine, Marius Kryazis. And this one is called The Peptide Bioregulator Revolution. And we went for one of those old Russian Revolution posters, you know. But this one explains to the public what the research is about and why it's so fundamental. Okay. And if I may, Michele, and then we also published this magazine called Aging Matters.
I'm so glad you brought these on because I didn't get your box. Haven't received your goodie bag yet, your goodie box. So I'm just so eagerly waiting, and I was meant to ask you, could you please have those books and the magazine to show us? So thank you.
Absolutely. I'm sorry they weren't with you by today, but they'll probably be with you tomorrow, knowing the way things work.
After the podcast, of course. Yeah.
But that was our last one.
After that.
That was our last one, which people can go and download for free. And you can see what it's called, I hope, Hacking Aging with Peptides. And this is the work of Bill Lawrence, which we'll get into about his work. But gene switches in food, that is such a big statement. I don't think people realize.
I want to stop you for that for 1 second. So which foods are the ones that have the potential for biohacking, let's say, the aging process?
Well, I think there's a multitude of foods, but the ones that they extract, or perhaps the easiest place to extract, are meats. I'm not saying it's only meats. There are certainly plants as well. And of course, it also helps to explain why we have to eat probably a plethora of foods, because you're not going to get all the peptides in one food group or in one source, you know. So this probably helps to explain why you have to eat this. We have to eat a fairly wide plethora of different foods.
And would it be only grass-fed that you would advocate if there's going to be a focus on meat?
Well, yes. I mean,
in England, you're far more advanced on this than we are. We're still trying to make the cows grow fat and big with hormones and bad corn and all the other things that make you fat and unhealthy. But I think in England, you have a much better profile of your beef, your cows,
Well, we
But
had a big scare, don't forget, about 20 odd years ago with
the
the
mad
mad
cow,
cow thing,
yeah,
and things really got changed. And we have a thing called from farm to fork
yeah, I know
to
you
know
do.
the complete. One thing that worried me some years ago was learning that in some dairy produce, for example, that the cows can be given up to 240 odd different antibiotics.
I
You
know.
know, and whatever you put into an animal ends up in the food, right?
And the
So it's
water,
obvious,
and the water
really.
they drink too, Phil. The water
Yeah,
that they're drinking too is contaminated, and a lot of times with pharmaceutical drugs from the runoff. So,
exactly. I mean,
so
when they try and ban, from the food packet, so that it contains GMO, and they say no, no, we shouldn't have that on there.
mhm,
Why? Because they know people don't really want to buy that if there was a label on the front saying this is a
right,
GMO product or whatever. But yeah, it's crazy. Of course, we all should know what is in our food. And every time we detour from nature, we lose something, don't we? So you're absolutely right. If you can get grass-fed cows properly, organic, all that, you're
mhm.
doing yourself a favor, obviously.
And obviously, all these peptides are, if they're bovine, then they are coming from, and that's certified by you and your groups, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
it's actually it's actually Danish sourced that and
oh,
it's actually a Danish source. By the way, these peptides are available in synthetic form. So
mm,
if you are a vegetarian, you can go down that route.
mhm.
But yeah,
They're all
principally it's the naturals.
right, and they're also available injectable, although not through what you are advocating because of the shipping.
Yeah, well, as soon as you put anything into injectable form, even if it was vitamin C, you are
Mm,
making it a drug
yeah,
by definition. And
right.
so at the moment, the Russians don't wish to export the injectables because they're worried about liability. Which is understandable. In other words, you know how it is in this world. But the capsules, and they're also available in a sublingual form as well. But the capsules work. This is the thing. They work orally, and we can get into that. So there is no need for these particular peptides to be injected. Some peptides will have to be injected.
Mm-hmm.
Come back to semerelin, it could
Mm-hmm.
could be injected, although it could also be used as an intranasal. That's
Mm-hmm.
another route. But the nature of intranasals and the nature of injections makes them medicines.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have so many questions to ask you. So, first of all, what's the difference between an adaptogen and a peptide bioregulating regulator?
That's
What would
a
you
that's a
just?
good question. And of course, adaptogens are mainly plants, right? I'm sure we could think of some of those plants. That seems to have, of my remembrance of some of the adaptogens I looked at, it seems to have a balancing effect on hormones.
Correct.
Not necessarily raising one particular hormone or depleting another hormone, but a sort of balancing effect. Now, I'm unaware if the research has been done here or not. Um, but it's an interesting thought, isn't it? That why does these certain plants, like I don't know, maca comes to mind for me, and there's that other one that comes from the Caucasus Mountains. I'll think of it in a minute. And why does it have a rebalancing effect on particular hormones? Could it be that they contain some of these peptides? And
Mm-hmm.
don't forget, a specific peptide is going to be a specific gene switch. Okay, they're
Right.
very specific. They don't. The Russians, the research shows that no one peptide has more than about 4 gene switches. So that's a very small number. Um,
Right.
but it means it becomes target shooting.
Mm-hmm.
It get pinpoint accuracy with different things. So I don't know if some of these plant adaptogens have some of these peptides in. Could be. But when
Mm-hmm.
you get this specific peptide in the supplement or in the food, you're activating or silencing, because it goes both ways. This is part of the bioregulator part of the word, okay?
Mm-hmm.
A specific gene. So what we're talking about now is, I'll give the example I always give because it's the easiest one to think about. So we have our thyroid gland in our neck, and it's a very important gland. I think most people know that it has many roles, but one of the key roles is its temperature regulation. It likes to keep us within a very specific and very accurate temperature. And unfortunately, a large percentage of the adult population, for lots of different reasons, have a weak thyroid, and they're what they call hypothyroid. The level's a little bit too low. You can find out very easily. Yes, you can go and do a blood test, but if you wake up in the morning, take your body temperature straight away, write it down, do that for about 2 weeks, go back and look at the number. What's the number that comes up the most? Sorry, I'm going to talk Celsius, but if you're between 36.3 Celsius, 36.7 Celsius, you've got a good healthy thyroid. But if you're regularly under 36.3 Celsius, you are hypothyroid. You're a little bit weak, okay? And if you're over 36.7, it's the other way, hyperthyroid. But
yeah, so sorry to interrupt, for everybody, that's called the Barnes method. And it's actually not used as much as it probably should be, because a lot of thyroid tests are done with the blood, where the blood is a prick of time in the moment. And as Phil is saying, it's better to, when you wake up, put that, today's thermometers are so fast. It used to be, I used to put it under my arm and wait, whatever amount of time. But today it's like a nanosecond and you have your temperature.
You put it on your forehead, right? And go, beep.
Yeah. Like we did at COVID, right? But 36, so Celsius, that would be like 98.5. I think it's about 3 times. Almost.
Yeah, we'll have to get our calculators out. It's my weakness is maths. Broder Barnes, of course, wrote the gentleman you just referred to, wrote perhaps the most famous book it's on the shelf behind me there somewhere, hypothyroidism, the undiagnosed epidemic. And he, I think, oh gosh, when did he write that? Late 70s, early 80s. He, I think at the time, he diagnosed that 40-something% of the adult population in America was hypothyroid. Now today, unfortunately, Broder Barnes is no longer with us, but today his pupil is still with us, and there's a lovely man by the name of Dr. Rick Wilkinson, and he lives in Washington State, and I know Rick, and he's a super guy, and he was a pupil of Broder. And I asked him in an interview that he did some years ago for our magazine, did he think that percentage was still accurate? And he said, no, it was higher.
Much higher.
Yeah, he said between 50 and 60%.
Well, isn't it interesting that the obesity rate in America is about 65 or so percent right now, maybe even higher, according to some doctors. But it seems to parallel the metabolism provoking influence of a normal thyroid, which if people are hypothyroid, they do have some disadvantages in weight management because their metabolism is much slower. I mean, I don't know, you certainly can't blame it all on the thyroid.
No, absolutely. But there's another story here, Michele, which I'm sure you're very cognizant with, and that is another man called Weston Price.
Of course.
And he went, I don't know when was it, in the 20s or 30s or something. He went out to a lot of these native tribes, some of which don't even exist anymore in South America and places like that. And he found a correlation between the tribes that, because, it wasn't that long ago, we ate everything, right? Nothing was wasted. You wouldn't waste anything. But now, of course, we've become very fussy. Oh, I won't eat the dark meat of chicken. Oh, no. Never mind the testicles of an animal or whatever. But, in the old days, it wasn't like that. And his discovery was that the tribes who ate the necks of animals and therefore consumed the thyroid gland, didn't have hypothyroidism. So that's one of the things he noted. Now, coming back to our peptides again, and it kind of goes hand in glove with some of the very early treatments that doctors used to give and still do are organ extracts. Okay, that in the 20s, 30s, and possibly into the 40s, that was de rigueur to have organ extracts. And now we've moved on, I suppose, from there in different aspects. But coming back to the peptides, if you take the thyroid peptide bioregulator, you're going to activate or silence genes that are directly responsible for the manufacture of the thyroid hormones from your thyroid gland. So if you have a weak thyroid, it's going to activate and actually raise them. But the really crazy thing that is very hard for a lot of people to get their heads around is if you're hyperthyroid, it will silence the genes and bring it back. It's a normalizing. It has, if you will, an adaptogen type effect.
Well, that's okay. So that brings up another question. So, I've always been concerned about hormones, that if you start taking hormones like DHEA and thyroid, and that your gland itself, your natural producing organ, gets lazy and says, "Hey, I don't need to produce this anymore because she or he is giving it to me in a what do you call it, exterior or external." Format. So
Exogenous is the big word, but yeah.
Right, yeah. So with these peptides, if you're taking hormones, this is maybe a little complicated, but how do you regulate the peptides, using the peptides to get the balance and the normalizing effect if you're already on those hormones?
Okay, slightly, there obviously could be contraindications if people are on potent hormone and or certain drugs, of course, that would affect hormonal balances. The first thing that's worth mentioning about the peptide bioregulators is that they've been dosed millions of times in Russia over decades, and there have been no serious side effects reported. Okay, that's so I can't speak for every single individual and what they were using, but we do have some experiences beyond that. Firstly, let me caveat this by saying hormones are very powerful tools, obviously. The word hormone meaning chemical messenger, okay? But the role. So, and it's a complicated business. Now you've got brilliant endocrinologists out there like Thierry Hertog from Belgium or Jonathan Wright from the United States. And they've written the most amazing books. They give the most amazing lectures. And if anyone wants to really get into this, I do recommend both of those gentlemen. But you soon becomes apparent that when you're trying to look at and balance what could be over 400 different hormones in the human body, there's a handful of people on the planet who can do it. And of course, when you take a hormone, let's take DHEA as the example, it can do a multitude of different things. A couple of things I know about DHEA. I could tell you a funny story here. I don't know. Maybe you want to edit it out, but it is a true story. Do you want a funny story or not? If not, I'll move on.
Tell us a funny. Yeah, we need a funny story. Go ahead.
Okay. I like to have a laugh. I think we should have a laugh.
I love that you have a sense of humor.
It was 1995. And I went to my first A4M in Las Vegas, which A4M, for anyone doesn't know, is the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. Very good organization, very prominent in the field. And today they have a very big following, and rightly so. And at the time, I was working with a company called Life Enhancement. And actually, we were the first company in the United States to bring DHEA to the market, because that was the year that the Dietary Health and Supplement Act was passed, that allowed, and that was due to the work of Dirk Pearson and Sandy Shaw. And
who I followed back in the day. Life Extension, and Bill, of course, that's all right.
All great people, and so we were unbelievably busy because DHEA in 1995 was the buzzword. Okay, right. And when I came back to England, I was approached by some Harley Street doctors, and Harley Street in London is the premier private medicine in the UK. And they said to me, Phil, they said, we've heard this buzz from America about DHEA. Can we use it here in England? So I went back to the books and I reported back to them and I said, you're not going to believe this. And they said, what? I said, DHEA was approved for use in the UK in 1956.
Wow, and no one knew.
And nobody knew. And they all looked at each other and they said, what on earth were we using it for in the 50s? And I went, I don't know. I'm going to have to go back and have a look. And when I found out what it had been approved for, at first I was shocked. And then secondly, I kind of started laughing. But you have to remember one thing, and I'll explain it at the end here. Believe it or not, it was approved. The HEA was approved in the UK in the 50s. Who for? for young boys who were showing signs of homosexuality.
Oh, oh,
Today, that would be probably a criminal offence.
of
However,
course.
you have to remember that in the UK, it was illegal to be a homosexual until about 1965.
Right. Wow. How the world has changed, huh?
The world has changed. Why would that be the case? Well, there is some evidence that DHEA will convert to testosterone.
Mhm.
However, from my knowledge, it works better in women than it does in men.
Mhm.
And
Mm.
it has to be DHEA sulfate and not 7-keto DHEA.
Right.
7-keto DHEA is a final metabolite and it won't
Right.
convert to testosterone.
That's more
So
for thermogenesis, whereas the regular sulfate one is for from the adrenal glands and helps to stimulate testosterone, like you say, or at
exactly.
least that's alleged anyway.
So, but of course, if you just take DHEA by itself, I think any hormone program, you should be checking yourself. You should be on some kind of monitoring program. It depends on multitude of different factors because you're going to imbalance. DHEA is produced by the adrenal glands, and the adrenal glands produce quite a few different hormones. So you could end up. I mean, one thing by pushing up DHEA, you lower your cortisol levels. Now that
Mm-hmm.
might be a good thing in some cases because cortisol is one of the few hormones as we get older that tends to go up. Most hormones go down, right? But
Well, for everyone that's listening, cortisol is a stress hormone, and it also puts on weight. So there we go back to our 65% and the stress that people are enduring after, the last few years, particularly, and the fact that cortisol has been increasing. And you mentioned that Terry Hertog actually gives his patients cortisol, which I was quite surprised at. Why would you want to give somebody something that's makes them gain weight and makes them
well,
have stress?
everything in balance, right? Everything. I mean, everything I've ever seen. There's two curves. It's either a U-shaped curve or a bell-shaped curve, and
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, you want to be in the middle because
Mm-hmm.
too much. If water, you drink too little water, we know what that's damaging. You drink too much water, it can be damaging, right? You always want to be in the middle on
Correct.
these curves. It seems to me like that, anyway. So I know Thierry, and he's shocked a lot of doctors over the years, but there are people who are low cortisol, and if you give them a little bit of cortisol, like hydrocortisone, they
Mm-hmm.
get a lot of energy, they get a lot of focus.
Mm-hmm.
You
It's
know,
their motivation, right? Well, I
exactly.
don't want I don't want to get off track, and I love your story, and thank you for that. It just shows us how amazingly different the world is in a short period of 60 years or so. What I want to these are some of the questions that are like burning in me right now to ask you. So, why is it that the Russians would now allow these very precious peptides that have helped their population be kind of a cutting edge ahead? Why are they allowing them to become mainstream and be exported to, particularly to the United States?
Mm,
Of course, they come through, in your case, they come through you, but you're dealing with distributors in the United States
mhm,
that
mhm,
bring them to us. So why do you first? How do you know their efficacy? That you're getting exactly what they've been generating in their country, and
mhm.
two, why are they doing it? Why are they allowing us to share in some of this knowledge and the benefits?
Mm. Okay, I'll answer the first point about efficacy. Um, Firstly, they're coming directly from the institute that did all the research.
St. Peter.
I'm working directly with the St. Petersburg Institute for Biogerontology. I know Professor Cavinson, who is the lead researcher, and I
Right.
know quite a few of his staff. I've been over there, they've been over here. We've met each other, so I've helped write things, and so I've got a good working relationship with them. It's always been the prerogative of IAS to work with the original people wherever we can, because we know the devil is in the detail, right? You might say, well, here, I've got exactly the same things. Have you? Have you really? There may be subtle differences, but this one works well and this one doesn't work so well. So we work directly with the Institute. So I know that we're getting the original materials.
Mm-hmm.
This has also been proven outside of Russia. I'd like to get into the work of Dr. Bill Lawrence when you're ready. But to answer your second point, which was sorry, you have to remind me because I'm reading.
Why is the Kremlin allowing
Thank you.
us
Thank you.
to be beneficiaries of their very precious discoveries?
Yeah, I think two reasons, Michele. Firstly, Russia is a different place today. It's not the Soviet Union, and this has now become a commercial entity. So it's bringing money into Russia, okay, or the Russian countries. So that has happened. And thirdly, or secondly, whichever you look at this, in my working career, whenever I've heard anyone say that is a so-and-so military secret, I've always gone, I want to listen twice as hard. Because whichever country it is on the planet, the military are able to do things that cannot be done in the public domain. They are a separate entity. You don't think that the American military is actually governed by the FDA, do you? Okay. Certainly not in their black ops and all the rest of it. And every country over the years has done something with, shall we call them, supplements. The most famous one was during the Second World War. One of the reasons, and I've read about this, I have a kind of interest in it. My father was in the Second World War. The Blitzkrieg, when the German tanks and planes, they took France in 6 weeks. Unheard of. Unblitz went straight through France and Belgium and all the rest of it in 6 weeks. How did they do that? Was it simply, with using the armor and the planes? All the troops were on amphetamines. They were all on amphetamines. Wow. So they had this incredible energy. They were working out 20 hours a day, day after. It's actually been said by some historians, had they have been held up another 2 or 3 weeks, they would have been exhausted, because there's a big downside to amphetamines, right? So maybe the history would have been completely changed had they have been delayed by 2 or 3 weeks. So during the Korean Wars and the Vietnam Wars, it's quite well known that American fighter pilots were using different barbiturates, amphetamines and things, so they were focused. Modafinil, or modafinil, as some people call it, is an agoric drug that stimulates noradrenaline in the brain. It's a breakthrough in the treatment of narcolepsy, which is sleeping in the daytime, and cataplexy, which is sudden fatigue. Talk to most people about that as a smart drug and they go, oh, wow, that's an incredible one, right? That was a French military secret. That was originally designed by Lafon Laboratories for the French Foreign Legion. Okay, so there are many of these things. So coming back, sorry to be a bit long-winded about this, but coming back to why the Russians have released it now, when you think about it, this was their secret in the 1980s and the 1990s. What's their secret now?
It's true.
Things have moved on, right? So I think they've released this now, knowing that they've got something else.
Except that, not to get political, but the performance thus far of their troops in Ukraine wouldn't underscore that there's some secret that they have that's causing them to do what the Blitzkrieg did for the Nazis, So anyway, I don't want to get off on that track, but let me ask you, because I know we're going to run out of time, but because I know I have to have you back, Phil, because we need to dive deep into peptide bioregulators and what they can do for all of us, because that's the meat of the bone here that we have to explore. But I knew with you that this could be, a several-hour discussion, and we only have 50 minutes. But so let's cut to the chase. If you could just tell us, if someone wants to try peptide bioregulators, what would be, and just recognizing everyone's biochemistry is different, and some people have issues that they have to address. But if you were giving a kind of a blanket suggestion to someone who wanted to put their big toe in the water, what would be the ones that they should try first?
Okay. Short answer, if you have a weak point and you know you have a weak point, address the weak point. If you have a car and you have flat tires,
Mhm.
What are you going to do? Change the oil? No.
Because you can't get the rest of it going if you don't give the thing. So the chain is only as strong as the weakest link.
Exactly. So that's
Okay.
point one. And there are 21 different. So if it's the liver, the kidney, the thyroid, the thymus, the list is long.
Right.
That's one side. However, if we then are going to say, no, for my age, I'm a healthy individual, no medical issues, but I'm really interested in living well, living long, etc. You're a real anti-ager, longevity enthusiast, whatever you want to call it. Then I think there are three peptides that are the top of the tree. And I can explain, hopefully, if we've got another couple of minutes to explain why I think they're at the top of the tree. First and foremost, the pineal peptide, because the pineal is a very special gland in the center of our brains. And we could go off on that. I've done a lot of work on the pineal and on melatonin that comes from the pineal, etc. But as a great Italian doctor once told me, Dr. Walter Pierpoli, the pineal gland is the conductor of the endocrine orchestra.
Right.
And as he said, if you have an orchestra and you have no conductor, what do you make? You make noise. But if you have an orchestra with a conductor, you make music. So the control of the pineal through melatonin. So the pineal peptide has a number of impacts, including improving our own endogenous production of melatonin, but also through the work primarily of Dr. Bill Lawrence in Atlanta, his patients are extending the length of their telomeres, which is very fundamental in anti-aging. On top of that, that's number one. Okay, I'm going to put that at number one.
Okay.
But there are two other peptides that have a lot of synergy with this thing if somebody wants to go up to the next level. The next one would be the thymus gland, because by supporting the thymus gland here in our chest, we're going to really improve our immunity. Okay, and I think we've all been aware of that in the last couple of years. And the third one, and when I interviewed Professor Cavenson some years ago and said which agents are synergistic, in other words, make the whole bigger, that make a bigger impact, the one that came up every time was the blood vessel peptide. And when you think about it, it's pretty obvious. If you're going to improve your blood flow, you're going to improve the supply of nutrition to your cells, you're going to improve the toxic removal from the cells. So, but it was those three principal peptides that took part in some of the biggest human trials you've ever heard of in your life that were conducted in the Soviet Union. And if you want to get into that, and we have time, I'll get into that. So those are the three. Unless you've got a weak point, unless your thyroid's bad or your adrenals are bad, then go for that. But if you want this overall protection in the pyramid, those three.
Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time. However, I am going to make a point to have you back. I know you have to go to the Bahamas, and I do want to talk in our next session about how the synergy between stem cell, because I know that's what you're going to be in the Bahamas dealing with that, but stem cells synergistically with peptide bioregulators and how the two can work together as the arsenal for the cutting edge of anti-aging today. And then the telomeres, we want to get into that because a lot of people don't know what telomeres do and why they're so important to anti-aging. So can you just keep that in the, on our list, and we'll get throw back in. And then as far as Dr. Bill Lawrence, I asked you this morning if I could have his contact. I think it's going to be good for everyone to know of a U.S. doctor who is doing exactly what you're describing today in the very preliminary way that we're going to get deeper into. So on my future podcast, I will try to interview him as well. And so people could probably be treated by him by Zoom, right? They don't have to be in it.
I can't speak for Bill. He's a very private man, but I'm sure he'll talk to you. But the interesting thing is there's over 120 people in his trial now, and most of them are medical doctors. So actually, a lot of these patients are going to end up being doctors, mostly American, being trained in this technology. So there's a beginning now of this information to be spread out. And by the way, Michele, I must, if you don't mind, mention one more thing I think is going to be very important. And again, I'm sure Dr. Lawrence will talk about it as well. and that is they are improving people's DNA methylation.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, that could be really at the top of the tree.
Yes, I forgot to mention that, because your microbiome and your gut-brain axis and the methylation which occurs from your genes, these are all part of the whole new frontier in anti-aging. So, Phil, before we go, tell us your website and how people who are curious to know more can find out more. I know they can go on the Aging Matters magazine, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. If they want to go and see our magazines and download them free of charge, it's aging-matters.com. And by the way, you can spell aging the British way with an E or without one. It's not a problem. Okay.
Well, thank you for being global.
My older brother, who's very British, always likes to wind me up when I see him and says to me, "Are you still doing the anti-agging?" But that's another thing. But that's one. I'm going to leave your because I know you're going to put a link in your notes there, Michele. So I'll leave guys to go and look for it. But if they use that store link that's going to be provided by the team, by using your code, will get 15% off their first order.
Thank you for mentioning that as well, because that's important. We do have a Michele Recommends on my website, which we encourage people to go to. So yes, there will be a link there for your contact to your team.
So if folks want to save some money, that's the place to go. If they just want to do a deep dive into information, then go to antiaging-systems.com. And on there, you'll see articles with references. You'll see videos, podcasts on many subjects. It's not just peptides.
I understand that. Okay, well, we've come to a very exciting end, but it's just too short, and I know that. I knew it would happen because you're just so fascinating and so much to share. And there's so much happening in this world that, that 140 number you mentioned and living it as if you are half of that age, is realizable. And, now with artificial intelligence and the new frontier that's, both positive and negative, but it's opening up a lot in the health world. So thank you so much for being with us today, Phil. And I wish you well on that trip. And what I'd like to do is when you get back and you're back, home again after that conference, you'll have so much to share with me, I know, with our viewers. So we'll set up another time to be together. So thank you again for a wonderful talk today, and safe travels.
Thank you very much, Michele. And I hope folks enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.